guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. I am so looking forward to today's video because I'm going to be chatting about my favorite romance stories. Listen, as the years passed, I have become more and more of a softie and I just love romantic plot lines, either if the book itself is a primary like romance novel or even just primary to secondary plot lines within fantastic books that just have a swoon-worthy romance. That being said, for today's video, I have pulled some of my recent favorite romance stories, all coming from a variety of different genres and even time periods. But before we dive into the books themselves, first a word from this video sponsor, which is Sundance Now. I am so excited to be partnering with Sundance Now because I'm going to be chatting about one of my favorite fantasy/romance books that has been adapted into a TV show, A Discovery of Witches. This is truly one of my fave romance-centered stories, and I'm happy to announce I am officially addicted to the TV show as well. But if you're not familiar, this story centers our main characters Diana and Matthew. Diana is a witch and Matthew is a vampire, and the first book follows them as they meet at Oxford. In this world, witches, vampires, and demons exist, but they're not supposed to interact, so when Diana and Matthew begin to become drawn to one another, things get complicated very, very quickly. The series itself has fantastic atmosphere between its academia setting and its overall historical vibes, and it's been amazing to see how that atmosphere has been adapted to the screen. Now is the perfect time to start watching A Discovery of Witches because the third and final season has begun to air now, and seasons 1 and 2 are available to stream on Sundance Now. I of course have an offer code for you guys to get Sundance Now free for 30 days. Click the link below in my description and use the code PERUSE30. It allows you to access not only A Discovery of Witches, but also their entire catalog of binge-worthy and critically acclaimed dramas, thrillers, and true crime series. Again, big shout out to Sundance Now for sponsoring this video. I will of course have all of this information, including the promo code, linked down below in my description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive back into the romance recommendations. Again, so for my favorite romances video, this is a bit of a hodgepodge of genres. Obviously, I do read predominantly fantasy, but I love romantic plot lines in fantasy novels, and I do of course read just traditional steamy or non-steamy romance stories as well. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. First book I'm going to chat about has been a recent obsession of mine. I have read the first 2 books in this series, and I honestly just keep immediately ordering the next installment because I'm just so hooked, and that is the Others series by Anne Bishop. This is an urban fantasy story that has a very slow burn romance at the core of it, but it also has wonderful friendship and community and action, and it is set in a really interesting urban fantasy world where basically humanity lives alongside supernatural/paranormal creatures. The setup of this world is that humans kind of traveled to a lot of land that was already controlled by creatures otherwise known as the Others. Many years ago, they essentially came to agreements that the Others would control the land and all the natural resources, but they would allow humans to kind of build their own settlements and their own cities. They kind of have a complicated relationship with each other that's oftentimes kind of spurring into direct conflict, but the humans kind of create the technological advancements and the Others kind of provide the natural resources for them to generate those. This particular book is set in a place called a courtyard, which is an Others establishment near a human settlement, and in this particular city there's a lot more interaction between the Others and humanity. This is a multi-POV book, but you primarily follow our main character Meg, who is a blood prophet. In the beginning of book 1, she escapes a compound. She has been held her entire life, and she flees to the Others courtyard because human law does not apply there. And our other main character is Simon, and he is the leader of this courtyard and is very suspicious of his new human liaison he just hired, Meg. Throughout this series, you basically follow Meg as she not only becomes a part, but an integral part of the courtyard community. You see her make friends, and also a large part of the story is Meg kind of encountering the world for the first time. She has been kept in this compound again for her entire life. There are so many situations and just skills that she has to learn, and throughout this series you see her become acclimated with just living life. And honestly, Meg as a main character is one that I find just so easy to root for, and you just root for her as she not only kind of overcomes all these different personal personal obstacles. Also, as she just begins to discover who she really is. Again, this is an urban fantasy story with a very slow burn romance, which I actually appreciate and is something I want to call out if you are interested in picking this series up. The author gives a lot of time and space for Meg and Simon to become very acclimated with each other, especially because Meg has a lot of trauma that she has to work through and is also incredibly inexperienced with not only having friends, but especially a romantic partner. This series also has a lot of action and really escalates in really interesting of ways. The plotting is really thoughtful and I am fully entranced by this particular series. I can't put it down, and I really enjoy it, and it is so far becoming one of my favorite urban fantasy romance stories. I also find it to be rather refreshing, and again, I really enjoy the pacing of this. I love it, and I also think it's a perfect romance book to pick up. Next up, I have two YA fantasy stories which I think have fantastic romance. I think they both have elements of hate to love very much centered within their stories, so it makes them incredibly addictive. The first is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This YA fantasy historical duology just has a very, very entertaining, very dramatic, hate to love, but I would also kill for you type of romance at its heart. This is a multi-POV story as well, but we primarily follow our two main characters, Juliet and Roma. This is a story set in the 20s in Shanghai, and Juliet and Roma both come from two very powerful but rival crime families, so they have been trained and raised their entire lives to hate each other. Before the start of the story, Roma and Juliet clearly had some type of relationship or situationship, let's call it. Juliet actually left Shanghai for a while and has just recently come back into town, which has basically put her in the center of not only the red flower politics, but also back into a complicated relationship with Roma, especially when the city of Shanghai becomes to be threatened by a mysterious parasite bug seems to be indiscriminately attacking and killing any individual within Shanghai itself. This book is rather entrancing and obviously has a really fun fantasy plot, particularly with the parasite element. I really also love how Chloe Gong really escalates and includes a lot of gang politics. The side cast of this book is really, really strong, but I would say the most fun element is definitely this romance, which I do feel like Chloe Gong really paces very successfully throughout the two books in this series. It really has a lot of simmering tension and a lot of dramatic obstacles that honestly makes this book painful and fun and really hard to put down. It's really a vibe where they both would rather kill each other than let someone else be with them or like burn the world down for each other. It's very toxic, but it's also very, very fun to read, and I think is a really successful hate to love, enemies to lover romantic plotline. Next series I have to recommend has to be the Last Hour series by Cassandra Clare. I am addicted to this. This series has so far completely ruined my life. Cassandra Clare just gets better and better with every single series she releases. She thinks of new ways to destroy you, to make you not be able to put it down. And the fun thing about Cassandra Clare's series as well is not only do you love the main pairing, but the casts in these books are so huge and there's so many different characters to fall in love with, different romantic pairings to fall in love with, and different plot lines to absolutely destroy you along the way. This, I would honestly say, the Last Hours trilogy so far, I think is my favorite Cassandra Clare series. It has the perfect mix of I can't be with you, but I want to be with you, and we're gonna lie about it, also including elements of Marriage of Convenience, and just overall the society and propriety elements of this book being around the turn of the century just makes it really, really fun. I would say though, all of Cassandra Clare's recent series are a must pick up, especially if you love romance-centered YA fantasy. The Dark Artifices, obviously the Infernal Devices as well, all have amazing, intricate, and really entertaining romantic plot lines, coupled of course with an urban fantasy story following a huge cast of characters constantly fighting off demons and evil plot lines, trying to protect their families, the ones they love, and just in general the world itself. I also totally understand that there are so many books by Cassandra Clare out, so many different series, and I get a lot of questions if you can just kind of jump right in. Personally, my response is I would just read the synopsis for the original series and then I would just start with the Infernal Devices. I would not skip the Infernal Devices. You do need to read that and the Dark Artifices before you can pick up the Last Hours, but they're all so good and so entertaining. But I would say the Last Hours is my favorite so far. Just the level of angst that Cassandra Clare was able to bring us to in this just destroyed me. just destroyed me. She's a master. She's a master at work. Next up, I have one contemporary romance series I wanted to shout out before I move into my historical fantasy romance options, and that is the Brown Sisters series by Talia Hibbert. I have read the first 2 books and for sure need to get to the 3rd book soon. I love this series. Just Talia Hibbert's characters and dialogue just immediately hook you. They're so much fun. They of course have a lot of steamy moments, and they're just a delight and are impossible to put down. They are companion novels, so you can kind of start wherever you want within the series. The first one is Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert, and this is kind of enemies to lovers. And then the second one, which I would say is my personal favorite so far, is Take a Hint, Dani Brown, which is friends to lovers. I'm gonna focus on this one specifically for this video, just because I love it so much, and I just think all the plot lines make it hilarious and steamy and just a perfect romantic good time. This follows our main character Dani, and she is very focused on what she wants, and that is professional success and academic renown. And she really is not looking for any type of romance. She is always looking for the occasional roll in the hay to relieve stress, but a committed romantic partner is not currently in the plan for her. But when big brooding security guard Zafir rescues her from an unlikely situation that happens on their university, they basically go viral for being like couple goals. So they decide to kind of keep up the story and continue to fake date. However, of course, this sort of fake dating begins to turn into a bit more, and we follow their story throughout this entire book. Again, hilarity, misunderstandings, but also so much communication, and just overall love and friendship is there from page 1. It's delightful. Talia Hibbert knows how to write dialogue so well. You immediately just love the characters you're reading from. They're so funny, and this one just has some of the best moments for sure. I love it. I need to read the 3rd one soon, but I love the Brown Sisters series. It's one of my favorite contemporary romance pickups. So the last set of books I'm going to recommend are all historical romance. The first one I'm just going to quickly get out of the way because it is a true historical romance series, which I would say is like my favorite true romance genre to pick up. And I'm going to be talking about the Girl Meets Duke series by Tessa Dare. I read a lot of historical romance, and this one continues to just be my favorite. It has not lost its top spot on the pedestal. This is another companion style romance series, which is super common. You kind of just follow a new girl within a certain friend group as they meet some sort of hot rich bachelor in the 1800s. But again, I just feel like Tessa Dare also just has such a way with dialogue, creating such a snappy back and forth between our 2 main characters, also adding a bit of heart within her stories. What I also really enjoy is that while these books are set in the past, I do feel like they have a lot of modernness to them, like consistent conversations regarding consent and just more modern viewpoints for women, which I know are not necessarily accurate to the time period, but I enjoy to read in any type of romance book that I pick up. These books are just delightful, full of a really interesting cast of girl main characters, as well as a large variety of male characters as well. The series also houses like every trope you can think of, so I would just check out the synopsises, and if there's one that kind of calls out more to you, obviously we have Marriage of Convenience, we have Arranged Marriage, you've got a plethora to pick from. There's also a new book that I want to say just recently came out that I also need to pick up. I've read the first 3 books within this series, and they just continue to be my favorite. I think they are so much fun. Last 3 historical romance books I'm going to recommend are more historical fantasy stories that have romance more as the secondary plot line, but I think the romance was just written so well and also became one of my favorite parts of the story while I was reading it. The first book actually has a drama that's available on Netflix, so if you love K-dramas or C-drama or Taiwanese drama, which The Ghost Bride was made into, this is a great book to pick up because I do feel like it has a lot of those tropes that I love to watch in my more romantic TV show options. The Ghost Bride is a historical fiction fantasy story set in Malaysia at the turn of the century, and it follows our main character Li Lan, who is the daughter of a genteel but bankrupt family. Given this, she does not have very many prospects for marriage, and the certainty of her future is very much up in the air because obviously in this time women often have to rely on marriage for their long-term stability. At the beginning of this book, her family is offered a very unusual proposition for Li Lan, and that is for her to become a ghost bride for this family's son who recently passed away. Obviously, Li Lan immediately wants to reject this offer, but given the financial prospects of it, she is considering it. Shortly after visiting that wealthy family's home, Li Lan begins to realize that she herself is beginning to be haunted, and from there she falls into a deep sleep and begins to have to travel through the Chinese Chinese afterlife. This book is just amazing. One, it just has so many wonderful elements of Chinese folklore. The fantasy elements are just so well realized. Just seeing the world that Yang Shichu was able to create was just absolutely intoxicating. Two, I would also say this is very much a coming of age story. It centers Li Lan as she's trying to make decisions to save herself, save her family, but also kind of take back her own fate and future for herself, make decisions that she wants to make for her own well-being, which I really love that was very much the heart of the story itself. Li Lan is smart and courageous, and you see her have to overcome so many different obstacles. And then third, there is a very mysterious and romantic, fantastical romantic plotline as well. It is definitely a secondary element to the story, but that is also why I feel like it works so well, because it really is about falling in love with Li Lan and rooting for her, and then ultimately kind of seeing where her heart takes her, I think is really wonderful. There's a lot of twists and turns. This book is super dramatic, but it just has so many great elements as well. I loved it, and I thought it had such wonderful romantic elements too. The next book I have to recommend, I would say, is one of the most romantic books I've ever read. I wouldn't say it's so steamy, but it's really a romance that just honestly has stood the test of time. I'd say thousands of years, but also one that just burrows into your heart, and just the pain and the love that you feel for these characters and their love for each other will break you. And that is the Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This is a very beloved and famous story, and it also is a reimagining of the life of Achilles and Patroclus and a lot of the events that occurred within the very famous Iliad. This book is told from Patroclus's point of view, and we follow him from being a young boy. We see him travel from his family home and move to Achilles' family estate. There you see both Achilles and Patroclus become quick and fast friends. You also begin to see over many, many years that friendship slowly develop into something more, and that being young love. And then you follow them again as Patroclus basically decides to follow Achilles, as he is determined to kind of find and seal his fate as a powerful warrior within the Trojan War itself. This is a book that's just so beautifully written and told. The lyrical writing is just honestly astonishing and will take your breath away. The other interesting component about this book is that it's full of so many famous moments from Greek myth, but what Madeline Miller is so successfully able to do is actually humanize those moments, which not only provides kind of a fresh point of view to an otherwise very well-known moment, but kind of grounds it in a new and different reality that just makes you feel so connected to the lives of Achilles and Patroclus. This is a tragic love story, and that we definitely know where the narrative itself is going, especially if you're at all familiar with Greek mythology, but it also is just so wonderfully realized and romantic. It will break your heart, and just seeing the story told through Patroclus's point of view is just so wonderful as it is heartbreaking. Patroclus would do anything for Achilles. Achilles is a shining star in his eyes, and it's not because he's one of the most powerful warriors of his age. It's just because he's Achilles and he loves him. And seeing their love story throughout the entirety of this book is just beautiful, and it'll ruin your life. If you want a romance that will make you bawl, this is the one to pick up. And the last book I'm going to recommend might be a bit of a surprise, and that is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This is an incredibly intense historical fantasy story that has very good action, just a wonderfully constructed fantasy, and is set in a fascinating time period. But this is a queer and lyrical reimagining of the founding emperor of the Ming Dynasty. This follows our main character Zhu, and at the beginning of the story we open on her childhood. She's growing up in a very poor, famine-riddled village. She is also the second-born daughter to the family. At the beginning of this book, her family takes her brother to get his fate read. He is told during this meeting that he is going to have a future full of greatness. But shortly after this meeting itself, everyone in Zhu's family, including her brother, passes away. So she decides to take his fate in her own hands and actually takes his identity and leaves this small town, travels to a monastery, posing as her brother and a boy. Follow her not only as she begins her education as a monk, but also begins training in other areas as well, propelled by a desire to survive, but also to seize that greatness for herself. We see Zhu as she literally begins to take on the entire Mongol Mongol Empire and try to create revolution within China. This is book 1 to a new series, and again, it is incredible for so many different reasons. Just the historical setting, the intensity of the plot. This is also a multi-POV story, and identity and queerness is very much explored within the narrative. Alongside all of that, this book also has a secondary queer romantic plotline, which I of course wanted to call out and why it's included within this video. I also want to say it is not a hyper romanticized plotline, in that this is a book that follows a lot of characters who have to make difficult choices. It has elements of gray morality, and you see Zhu especially kind of get caught up in this path for greatness for themselves. That being said though, the relationship and the romantic plotline that is present within the story was one I was personally really taken away with. I really think it added a different dimension to our main character and also provided them an outlet to kind of talk through different personal fears and emotions. It also definitely had a few rather steamy scenes, and in general I know it's going to be very important for later books in the series as well. And I also think it's just such an interesting inclusion given the time period and also how our main character is posing as a man. I really loved this book. I think it has so many fantastic elements to the plot, including a really interesting and dynamic romance. This is a must read in my opinion, which is also why I included it on this list as well. Alrighty guys, those are my favorite romance stories. Let me know down below some of your favorite romantic books, either a book with a fantastic secondary romantic plotline or primary. I am all ears because I am constantly adding books like that to my TBR. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye!